May 6, 1944. 3:28 in the morning, mid-Atlantic. Oberleutnant Gerhard Seehausen had survived 8 war patrols in U-66. He'd sunk 33 ships. He knew how to disappear, how to escape, how to survive the close calls that killed other commanders. He'd been at sea since January 16th, almost 4 months. His batteries were low, his crew exhausted, his boat worn down by constant diving and surfacing. He'd surfaced to recharge in the dark, waiting for a supply rendezvous that would let him finish the patrol and go home. He fired 3 recognition flares when he saw the approaching ship. Standard procedure. He thought it was the German supply submarine he'd been waiting for. It wasn't. The destroyer Escort Buckley was closing at 23.5 knots, and Seehausen had just given away his position to the one kind of American warship that U-boat commanders had learned to genuinely fear. Not the big destroyers, not the heavy cruisers, not even the battleships that protected the carrier task forces. The little ones, the cheap ones built in 3 months from merchant hull conversions, the ones that hunted in groups, the ones that wouldn't quit, the ones that stayed on your position for 27 hours, if that's what it took to kill you. Through 1942 and into early 1943, the Atlantic belonged to the U-boats at night. They operated in wolfpacks, coordinated groups of 8 to 15 submarines that would gather around a convoy and attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The tactic worked because no convoy escort force had enough ships to defend against threats from every bearing at once. The system was elegant in its simplicity. U-boat headquarters in France, Dönitz's command center at the Château de Pignerol, would use radio intercepts and reconnaissance reports to identify convoy routes. Then, headquarters would position submarines in patrol lines across the expected path. The lines stretched hundreds of miles. When one U-boat made contact, it would shadow the convoy and transmit position reports every few hours. Other submarines in the patrol line would converge on those coordinates. Then, they'd wait for night. The attacks came from everywhere at once. One submarine firing torpedoes from the starboard quarter, another attacking from the port beam, a third coming in from dead ahead, while a fourth circled around behind. The convoy escorts, typically 4 to 8 destroyers or corvettes for a convoy of 40 to 60 merchant ships, had to make impossible choices. Chase the submarine on the left and leave the right flank exposed. Stay in defensive formation and let the submarines maneuver freely outside gun range. Split the force and risk having too few ships to defend against any single attack. Most commanders chose defense. They kept their ships close to the convoy and hoped the merchant vessels could outrun or outlast the attacks. It was the right tactical decision given the mission parameters. The convoy had to get through. Losing 2 merchant ships was acceptable if 38 arrived safely, but it meant the U-boats controlled the engagement. They picked the time, they picked the range, they picked when to attack and when to withdraw. Individual Allied destroyers were formidable, fast, some could make 35 knots or better, heavily armed with 5-inch guns and depth charge racks, dangerous if they caught you on the surface. But they were also expensive, complex, and tied to fleet operations. You couldn't build them fast enough to defend every convoy. A proper fleet destroyer took 18 months to 2 years from keel laying to commissioning, and when they did escort merchant ships, they were stuck defending. They couldn't leave the convoy to chase a contact more than a few miles. The convoy couldn't wait for them to come back. U-boat commanders knew this. Surface at night beyond the convoy. Screen. Fire torpedoes from 600 to 800 meters. Dive. Move. Surface somewhere else. The destroyers would be forced to stay with the merchant ships. The typical engagement went like this. A U-boat fired a spread of torpedoes from outside the escort screen. The torpedoes took 45 seconds to a minute to reach the target. By the time the explosion occurred and the escorts reacted, the submarine was already diving and turning away. The destroyer would race to the attack position, get a brief sonar contact if the conditions were good, drop a pattern of depth charges based on where the submarine had been 2 minutes ago, and then have to return to the convoy before falling too far behind. Maybe the depth charges damaged the submarine. Maybe they didn't. The submarine commander would go deep, wait 30 minutes for the escorts to move on, surface 5 miles away in a different direction, and resume the hunt. It was frustrating warfare for the escort commanders. They were always reacting, always arriving after the attack had already happened, always forced to break off contact just when they might have been getting close to a kill. The numbers showed the problem clearly. In November 1942, U-boats sank 118 Allied ships, totaling 729,000 tons. In March 1943, after more than 3 years of war, after the Allies had refined their convoy tactics and expanded their escort forces, the U-boat sank 108 ships totaling 627,000 tons. Convoys were getting through, but the losses were unsustainable. German U-boat construction was accelerating. Admiral Karl Dönitz was commissioning new boats faster than the Allies were sinking them. Some months, twice as fast. Dönitz believed he could win the Battle of the Atlantic by sinking ships faster than the Allies could replace them. He had a simple mathematical target: 700,000 tons per month. If the U-boats could sustain that rate for 12 to 18 months, the British war economy would collapse from lack of food, fuel, and raw materials. The wolfpack system, what the Germans called Rudeltaktik, was designed specifically to hit that number. Concentrate overwhelming force at a single point. Hit hard. Disperse before the escorts could organize a counterattack. Repeat with the next convoy. And for months, it worked. Convoy after convoy took losses. Merchant ships burning on the horizon while the escorts raced in circles trying to find submarines that had already moved on. The escorts sank U-boats when they could, but not fast enough. The replacement rate was the problem. Germany was building 20 to 25 submarines per month. The Allies were sinking 10 to 15. The math favored the submarines. Time favored the submarines. But the Allies were building something Dönitz didn't fully appreciate until it was too late. Not better destroyers. Not faster corvettes. Something different. Something built specifically to turn the defensive convoy battle into an offensive hunt. The escort carrier changed everything. Not because it was powerful. The opposite. Escort carriers were cheap, slow, small, barely 500 feet long, displacing about 8,000 tons fully loaded. They were converted merchant hulls with flight decks welded on top and minimal armor protection. American shipyards could build them in 3 months from start to finish. Sailors called them Kaiser coffins after Henry Kaiser, whose shipyards mass-produced them using assembly line techniques. The official designation was CVE. The crews said it stood for combustible, vulnerable, and expendable. They weren't wrong. An escort carrier had a wooden flight deck over a merchant hull designed to carry cargo, not absorb torpedo hits. If a submarine got a clean shot, the carrier was going down. The crew knew it. They joked about it. But they also understood what the ship was for. The carriers carried about 24 aircraft, a mix of Grumman Wildcat fighters and Grumman Avenger torpedo bombers. Not nearly enough to challenge a fleet carrier in combat operations, but more than enough to find submarines over enormous stretches of ocean. Here's what made them revolutionary. They didn't have to stay with the convoys. Traditional convoy escorts had one job: protect the merchant ships they were assigned to defend. If a destroyer got a sonar contact 5 miles off the convoy route, it couldn't chase. The convoy couldn't wait. The merchant ships had schedules to keep, fuel limitations, destinations that couldn't be delayed. The destroyer had to let the submarine go and stay in position. That's defensive warfare. You defend what you're told to defend and nothing more. The hunter-killer groups worked differently. One escort carrier with 4 to 6 destroyer escorts formed an independent task group. They weren't assigned to a specific convoy. They were assigned to an area of ocean, sometimes 200,000 square miles of empty Atlantic. Their job wasn't defense. It was to find U-boats and kill them. the task group would steam to a location where Allied intelligence, codenamed the 10th Fleet, and run from a headquarters in Washington, had picked up radio transmissions from U-boats. Every time a U-boat transmitted position reports to coordinate a wolfpack attack, it gave away its approximate location. The Allied code breakers had broken the German Enigma cipher. They were reading the U-boat traffic in near real time. They knew where the submarines were gathering. The Escort carrier would launch aircraft in expanding search patterns. The Avengers carried surface search radar that could detect a surface submarine from 20 miles away on a good night. When they found one, they'd attack immediately with depth charges or Mark 24 acoustic torpedoes, homing torpedoes that tracked the sound of the submarine's propellers underwater. Or they'd call in the destroyer escorts for a coordinated strike. Aircraft keeping contact from above, while the destroyers closed from multiple directions. If the submarine dove, the destroyer escorts would track it with sonar and hold contact for as long as it took. Hours. All day, if necessary. All night, if that's what it took. Because they weren't protecting a convoy on a schedule. They were hunting. And they would stay on your position, coordinating with each other, rotating ships to maintain fresh sonar operators and full fuel tanks, until the submarine was either sunk or confirmed, escaped beyond sonar range. The first American hunter-killer group formed around the escort carrier, Bogue, in May 1943. Captain Giles Short commanded. The screening destroyer escorts were old flush-deckers from World War I, Belknap and George E. Badger, not the newest ships in the fleet, not the fastest. But they didn't need to be new or fast. They needed to be persistent. On May 22, 1943, aircraft from Bogue found U-569 on the surface southwest of the Azores. The submarine was commanded by Oberleutnant Hans-Peter Hinsch. He'd been at sea for 41 days. His boat was low on fuel and heading back to base. The Avenger attacked with depth charges. The submarine crash-dived, but took damage. Hinsch tried to escape underwater, but Bogue's destroyer escorts picked up the sonar contact and began a methodical hunt. After 6 hours of depth charge attacks, U-569 surfaced with severe damage. The crew abandoned ship. 47 survivors were pulled from the water. 6 men went down with the submarine. Bogue had its first kill. It wouldn't be the last. December 12, 1943. Mid-Atlantic, west of the Canary Islands. Lieutenant Commander William Fowler Chambliss was flying an Avenger off Bogue when he spotted a surfaced U-boat in the early morning darkness. This was U-172, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Carl Emmerman. The submarine had been operating for months in the South Atlantic and the waters off West Africa, where Allied anti-submarine coverage was thinner than in the main convoy routes. Emmerman had sunk 26 ships across 6 patrols. He was experienced, skilled, and confident in his ability to evade pursuit. He'd done it before. Chambliss attacked. He dropped a Mark 24 acoustic torpedo, codename Fido, into the water behind the diving U-boat. The Fido was one of the war's best-kept secrets. It was a small, slow torpedo designed specifically for anti-submarine work. Once it hit the water, it activated a passive sonar system that listened for propeller noise. When it detected a submarine, it turned toward the sound and tracked it. The Germans didn't know it existed. They had no countermeasures. The Fido hit U-172's stern. The explosion damaged the propellers and rudder but didn't sink the boat. Emmerman went deep, down to 700 feet, far below the normal safe operating depth for a Type 9C submarine. The pressure hull groaned and creaked under the strain. Rivets popped. Small leaks appeared in pipe joints, but the hull held. Emmerman thought he'd escaped. He hadn't. Bogue's screening destroyers, George E. Badger, Clemson, Osmond Ingram, and DuPont, picked up the sonar contact and began a systematic attack. The destroyers coordinated their approach. One would hold sonar contact, while the others maneuvered into attack positions. Then, they'd drop depth charges in overlapping patterns designed to bracket the submarine's probable position. Emmerman would maneuver, change depth, try to break contact. The destroyers would adjust, reacquire, and attack again. For 27 hours, the crew of U-172 could hear everything. The destroyer's propellers overhead, multiple ships circling like sharks. The splashes as the depth charges hit the water. The silence between the splash and the detonation. That terrible few seconds where you knew it was coming but didn't know how close. Then the concussion, the hull shuddering, light bulbs shattering, loose equipment flying across the compartments, the sound of metal under stress. The air inside the submarine grew foul with carbon dioxide. Men vomited from the bad air and the constant stress. Some men sat silently, staring at nothing. Others prayed. The boat's batteries were draining with every maneuver. The motors drew power. The air circulation system drew power. Eventually, there would be nothing left. They would have to surface or suffocate in the dark. Emmerman tried everything. He ordered the boat silent and drifted, hoping the destroyers would lose contact. They didn't. He turned hard and used the last of his battery power to sprint away at maximum underwater speed. The destroyers tracked him easily. Their sonar operators were experienced. They knew how to hold contact through evasive maneuvers. And they had 4 ships taking turns, so they always had fresh operators listening. Emmerman surfaced on December 13th at 0400 hours. He had no choice. His crew poured out of the hatches, gasping for air that didn't smell like diesel fuel, and unwashed men and fear. The 4 destroyers opened fire immediately. 5-inch shells screamed across the water. The first salvo hit the conning tower. Men on the bridge were killed instantly. More shells hit the pressure hull. Emmerman gave the order to abandon ship. 46 men made it into the water. 13 died in the barrage or went down with the boat when it sank 90 seconds later. The destroyers rescued the survivors. One of them was Oscar Mantell, an intelligence officer who had been hitching a ride on U-172 to get back to Germany after a staff assignment in the Far East. During interrogation, Mantell provided detailed information about German U-boat dispositions, tactical, procedures, and communication protocols. The intelligence proved invaluable to Allied codebreakers working to maintain their advantage in reading German naval communications. 27 hours. That's how long the hunter-killer group stayed on one target. No convoy to protect, no schedule to keep. Just the hunt, methodical and relentless, until the submarine was destroyed. This was the new math. And it was breaking Donitz's calculations in ways he couldn't fix. Imagine you're a U-boat commander in mid-1944. You're on patrol in the mid-Atlantic. You've been briefed that the Allies have these new escort carrier groups operating independently of the convoys, but you haven't encountered one yet. Most of your experience is with convoy escorts, ships that attack and then leave to stay with the merchants. You know how to handle those. You've done it successfully before. You surface at night to recharge batteries. Standard procedure, something you've done hundreds of times. The ocean is calm. Your lookouts scan the horizon with binoculars. Nothing. The sky is overcast, no moon. The ocean is dark and empty in every direction. Then your radar detector picks up a signal. Aircraft radar. Centimetric wavelength, the new type that your METOX detector can barely pick up. But that's impossible. You're 600 miles from the nearest land. No patrol bomber has that kind of range. The fuel load alone would make it impossible, unless it launched from a ship. You dive. Emergency dive. The alarm sounds throughout the boat, crew scrambling from bunks and duty stations, hatches slamming shut, the boat tilting forward as the ballast tanks flood. You're at periscope depth in 45 seconds. At 200 feet in 90 seconds. You level off and go silent. Engines off. Crew ordered not to move. Listening. You hear an aircraft pass overhead. The sound of its engines changes as it circles. Then another aircraft. They're searching. They know approximately where you are. Your radar detector is still picking up their search patterns. Then you hear splashes in the water, but not the heavy thuds of conventional depth charges. something lighter, smaller. What are they? Then you hear propeller noise, not from the surface, from below you, coming closer, getting louder, a torpedo. But you didn't hear it launch from a ship or aircraft. It's tracking you by sound, homing on your propellers. You go deeper. You turn hard to starboard, putting the torpedo on your beam, where you hope it can't track as easily. The torpedo follows. It's still coming. You can hear it clearly now through the hull. A high-pitched whine getting louder. It detonates against your stern. The explosion throws men forward. Emergency lighting fails in the aft compartments. You have flooding. The stern is heavy. Your rudder isn't responding properly. Your boat is crippled but still underwater. Now you hear destroyers. Multiple screws. They're converging on your position from different directions. You can't outrun them. You're too damaged. You can't hide because they already have your position from the aircraft overhead. Your battery is draining. Your air is going bad. And they're not leaving. Hours pass. Every time you try to maneuver, they find you again. Every time you think they've lost contact, you hear the pinging of their sonar resume. They're coordinating. One holds contact while the others reposition. They're working you like wolves work wounded prey. One keeps you moving, wearing you down, while the others cut off escape routes. You realize something that makes your stomach drop. They're not going to leave, ever. They don't have a convoy to protect. They don't have a schedule. They're here for you, and they're going to stay until you surface or die underwater. Some U-boat crews stayed submerged until their batteries failed completely, choosing to suffocate slowly rather than surface into the guns waiting above. The last hours in a submarine, with failing air, are documented in interrogation reports from the few crews that survived. Men hallucinating from carbon dioxide poisoning. Men too weak to stand. Men making irrational decisions because their brains weren't getting enough oxygen. Others surfaced early, hoping to catch the destroyers off guard and fight their way out with the deck gun or make a run for it on the surface. Neither approach worked well against a coordinated task group. The aircraft spotted you the moment your conning tower broke water. The destroyers were already in gun range, already had firing solutions calculated. You gave the order to abandon ship. Half your crew made it out before the boat sank. The other half didn't. By the end of 1943, American escort carriers had sunk 24 German U-boats. Not the big fleet carriers operating in the Pacific. Just the little escort carriers with their hunter-killer groups. In 1944, the pace accelerated. Admiral Francis Lowe, who commanded the 10th Fleet Anti-Submarine Coordination Center in Washington, wrote in an October 1944 memo that hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers had accounted for approximately 60% of all U-boats sunk by American forces in the Atlantic and Mediterranean between April and September of that year. 60%. 7 American escort carriers led hunter-killer operations in the Atlantic during the war: Bogue, Card, Kor, Block Island, Croatan, Guadalcanal, and Wake Island. Together, their task groups sank 54 U-boats in confirmed kills. 31 were sunk by aircraft from the carriers, either through direct attack with depth charges and acoustic torpedoes, or by spotting for surface ships. The remaining 23 were sunk by the screening destroyer Escorts, working in coordination with aircraft overhead. But behind those numbers were individual submarines, individual crews, men with names, families, lives that ended in the North. Atlantic, U-527, sunk by Bogue aircraft on July 23, 1943. Commander Hugo Daring commanding. 12 survivors pulled from the water by Clemson. The rest, 32 men, went down with the boat. U-86, sunk by Bogue aircraft on November 29, 1943. Commander Walter Shug commanding. All hands lost, 48 men, no survivors. The boat disappeared during a coordinated attack. One moment it was there, damaged and struggling to dive. The next moment it was gone. The destroyers circled the oil slick for an hour, but nobody came up. U-575, sunk by combined air and surface attack from Bogue's task group on March 13, 1944. Commander Gunther Heidemann commanding. Aircraft damaged the submarine with depth charges. The destroyer Escorts held contact for 6 hours. The submarine surfaced with severe damage. The destroyers opened fire. Heidemann tried to scuttle before the boat was captured. 41 men died. 14 survivors were pulled from the water. Each loss represented a family somewhere in Germany that got a telegram. A mother who would spend the rest of her life wondering if her son suffered. A wife who would raise children alone. The German submarine service lost 30,000 men out of 40,000 who served during the war. 3 out of 4. That's not a casualty rate. That's near total destruction. The hunter-killer groups were a significant part of why that ratio was so brutal. Once they found you, they didn't let go. Which brings us back to May 6th, 1944. Back to Gerhard Seehausen on U-66, surfaced in the dark, batteries low, waiting for a supply rendezvous that would never come. The destroyer Escort Buckley, under Lieutenant Commander Brent Maxwell Abel, had been vectored to Seehausen's position by a night-flying Avenger from the escort carrier Block Island. The pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Jimmy Sellers, had picked up U-66 on radar and was feeding continuous position updates to Buckley as the destroyer Escort closed at flank speed. Seehausen realized his mistake when Buckley opened fire at 0308. The recognition flares he'd fired thinking the approaching ship was German had given away his exact position. Now, he was caught on the surface with a destroyer Escort closing at over 20 knots. He ordered the deck gun to return fire. His gunners got off several rounds before Buckley's 3-inch guns hit the conning tower repeatedly. Seehausen launched a torpedo at Buckley. A good shot. The range was close, the firing solution solid. The torpedo ran straight. Buckley's crew watched it skim past the hull, missing by less than 10 feet. If it had hit, Buckley would have been crippled or sunk. It didn't hit. At 0329, Abel made a decision that almost no destroyer captain in the modern era had made. He ordered his ship to ram the submarine. Buckley's bow crashed into U-66's forward deck at full speed. The impact drove the submarine's bow underwater. The two vessels locked together, Buckley's bow riding up over the submarine's hull, pinning it. Seehausen's crew began pouring out of the burning conning tower. Some were surrendering, hands up, trying to climb down into the water. Some were armed with pistols and knives, and some were trying to board Buckley. Hand-to-hand combat broke out on Buckley's deck. German sailors with knives and pistols climbing over the railing. American sailors grabbing whatever they could find to fight back. One gun crew started throwing empty shell casings, heavy brass cylinders, at the boarders climbing up the side. Another sailor grabbed a coffee pot from the galley and swung it at a German climbing the rail. A boatswain's mate named Leslie Raymond shot one German sailor with his .45 caliber pistol as the man tried to climb over the lifeline. Torpedo man John J. Doris punched a German sailor in the face and broke his hand doing it, the only American casualty in the entire melee. Buckley reversed engines and broke free. 5 German sailors were left stranded on the destroyer Escort's deck. They were quickly surrounded, disarmed, and taken below as prisoners. Seehausen wasn't finished. He maneuvered U-66 around in a tight circle and rammed Buckley near the engine room, trying to cripple the ship and create an opportunity to escape. The impact broke Buckley's starboard propeller shaft and punched a hole in the hull near the waterline. Water poured into the engine spaces. Damage control teams rushed to seal the breach, but the ramming also left U-66 stationary and exposed, locked against Buckley's damaged stern. Buckley's guns opened up at point-blank range, less than 20 feet. 3-inch shells tore into the conning tower. 20mm and 40mm cannon fire raked the submarine's deck. Someone on Buckley threw hand grenades down the open hatch, into the submarine's interior. The explosions killed men trying to escape through the tower. Seehausen gave the order to scuttle. The crew opened the vents. U-66 began to sink. Rescue operations lasted 3 hours. 36 German survivors were pulled from the water and transferred to Block Island. 24 men died, including Seehausen. Buckley limped back to Boston for repairs with her bow bent to port, holes in her stern, and a broken propeller shaft. The engagement had lasted 16 minutes. She'd expended 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm ammunition, 418 rounds of 40mm ammunition, and 390 rounds of small arms fire. Lieutenant Commander Abel received the Navy Cross. Buckley received the Navy Unit Commendation. And the story became one of the few documented cases of hand-to-hand combat between naval vessels in the Second World War. Not every hunter-killer encounter ended in sinking. Task Group 22.3, centered on the escort carrier Guadalcanal, was commanded by Captain Daniel Vincent Gallery. Gallery had been thinking about a problem that bothered him. Every U-boat the Allies sank took its codebooks, its Enigma machine, and its technical secrets to the bottom of the Atlantic with it. The intelligence value of those materials was enormous. What if they could capture one intact? Gallery briefed his crews on the possibility. If they damaged a U-boat badly enough that the crew abandoned it, but not so badly that it sank immediately, a boarding party might have time to get aboard and prevent the scuttling. It was a long shot, but Gallery was the kind of officer who believed in preparing for long shots. On June 4, 1944, Guadalcanal's aircraft found U-505 on the surface approximately 150 miles off Cape Blanco in West Africa. The submarine was commanded by Oberleutnant Harold Lange. He'd been at sea for 46 days. His boat was heading home. The Wildcats and Avengers attacked. Depth charges and rockets hit the water around the submarine. Lang crash-dived, but the damage was severe. The hull was flooding. The batteries were contaminated with seawater, producing chlorine gas. The boat was sinking. Lang surfaced and gave the order to abandon ship with scuttling charges set. The crew poured out of the hatches. 58 men went into the water. Guadalcanal's destroyer escorts, Pillsbury, Pope, Flaherty, Chatelain, and Jenks, closed in. Gallery had briefed them. He wanted that submarine. An 8-man boarding party from Pillsbury, led by Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert Leroy David, reached the submarine before it sank. They climbed down the conning tower hatch into a submarine that was flooding, with scuttling charges that could detonate at any moment, in a boat where every piece of equipment had German labels and the crew had been trained to destroy everything valuable before abandoning ship. David and his team found the valves that were letting water into the hull and closed them. They disconnected the demolition charges, carefully, because one wrong move would detonate them and kill everyone on board. They began collecting material, codebooks from the radio room, navigation charts showing German-approved safe routes through Allied minefields, recognition signals, technical manuals. The Enigma machine itself, U-505, was still afloat. The boarding party radioed Pillsbury for pumps and a tow line. Over the next several hours, working in terrible conditions inside a submarine that creaked and groaned with every wave, they stabilized the boat enough to get it under tow. U-505 was captured intact. It was the only German U-boat boarded and captured by the United States Navy during the entire war. The intelligence haul was extraordinary. The codebooks alone were worth the operation, but the technical intelligence was equally valuable. The Allies got to examine a functioning Type 9C submarine in detail. They measured acoustic signatures. They tested equipment. They documented everything. The Enigma machine and codebooks went straight to the codebreakers working to maintain their advantage in reading German naval communications. The intelligence helped Allied forces stay ahead of German attempts to improve their cipher security. U-505 was towed back to Bermuda, then to the United States. After the war, it was put on display in Chicago as a war memorial. It's still there, a permanent reminder of what the hunter-killer groups accomplished when they didn't just sink submarines, they captured them. The hunter-killer offensive changed the strategic math of the Battle of the Atlantic in ways Dönitz couldn't counter. Traditional convoy escorts were reactive. A U-boat attacked, the escorts defended. Maybe they sank the submarine, or maybe it escaped. The submarine might get sunk, but only if the escorts got lucky and the submarine made a mistake. The odds were always somewhat in favor of the submarine because there were more submarines than escorts, and the submarines controlled when and where to attack. Hunter-killer groups flipped the equation. Now the Allies controlled when and where to attack. U-boats couldn't hide in the mid-Atlantic gap anymore. Escort carriers closed it with aircraft that could search 200,000 square miles of ocean. They couldn't surface safely at night anymore. The aircraft had centimetric radar that could find them in any weather. They couldn't count on outweighting a single destroyer anymore. The task groups had multiple ships and could maintain contact indefinitely. Between May 1943, when the first hunter-killer group deployed, and the end of the European War in May 1945, the average number of U-boats actively operating in the Atlantic dropped from 108 boats to 31 boats. Some of that was due to Allied strategic bombing of submarine construction yards and bases. Some was due to tightened convoy defenses and the introduction of new technologies like the Lee light and improved radar. But a significant portion, roughly 30% of all U-boats sunk in the Atlantic during that period, was due to the hunter-killer groups methodically removing submarines from the operational count one at a time. The U-boats tried to adapt. They equipped submarines with snorkel devices that let them run diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, reducing the need to surface and expose themselves to radar-equipped aircraft. They added more anti-aircraft guns, twin and quad 20mm cannons, to fight back against attacking planes. They developed the Zaunkönig acoustic torpedo that homed in on destroyer propeller noise, giving them a weapon that could at least damage the hunter-killer escorts. None of it worked well enough. The hunter-killer groups kept finding them, kept sinking them. The escort carrier Bogue alone sank 13 U-boats or participated in their destruction across multiple patrols. The Block Island group sank 7 before Block Island itself was torpedoed and sunk by U-549 on May 29, 1944. The only American carrier lost in the Atlantic during the war, but even that loss didn't stop the program. Wake Island replaced Block Island within weeks. New escort carriers kept joining the fleet. New destroyer escorts kept commissioning from American shipyards at a rate Germany couldn't match. By mid-1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over as a strategic threat. U-boats were still operating, still sinking ships occasionally, but not at a rate that threatened Allied logistics or the build-up for the invasion of Europe. The convoys were getting through. 97% of all ships in convoy arrived safely at their destinations. The 700,000 tons per month that Donitz needed to cripple Britain never materialized. The math had shifted decisively against the submarines. Donitz knew it. In his memoirs written after the war, he acknowledged that the introduction of escort carriers and the shift to offensive anti-submarine operations had fundamentally changed the balance of the war at sea. The wolfpacks that had once terrified convoy captains were being hunted by groups that used the same pack tactics: coordination, persistence, overwhelming force at the point of contact. The difference was that the Allied packs had air cover that could search hundreds of miles in every direction, and the U-boats didn't. The Germans spent 6 years perfecting the wolfpack, built an entire doctrine around it, trained thousands of submariners to execute coordinated night surface attacks, promoted commanders who mastered the system, invested in radio communications infrastructure to coordinate submarines across thousands of miles of ocean. By 1942, they were sinking 700,000 tons of Allied shipping per month, using tactics developed over years of trial, refinement, and operational experience. The American hunter-killer groups took 18 months to develop. 18 months from the first escort carrier conversion in early 1943 to the point where hunter-killer operations were sinking U-boats faster than Germany could replace them. The tactical advantage Dönitz had counted on. The ability to choose when and where to attack. The vast empty spaces of the Atlantic where submarines could hide between convoy intercepts. The mathematical certainty that defense was harder than offense disappeared the moment the Allies put cheap escort carriers to sea with destroyer escorts that had nothing to do except hunt. That's the thing about tactical advantage built on a single operational assumption. It only works until someone figures out how to turn your strength into a weakness. The U-boats hunted in packs because individual submarines couldn't overwhelm convoy defenses. So the Americans built packs that hunted the hunters. The submarines relied on the vastness of the ocean to hide between attacks. So the Americans filled that vastness with aircraft that could search 1,000 miles in a single patrol. Gerhard Seehausen fired 3 recognition flares at Buckley on the night of May 6, 1944, because he thought the approaching ship was the German supply submarine he'd been waiting for. He died 36 minutes later when his boat sank with 23 other men still inside. The supply submarine he'd been waiting for, U-488, had been sunk 2 weeks earlier by an American hunter-killer group. Nobody told Seehausen. The radio message never got through. The hunters had become the hunted. And the ocean that had once hidden submarines became the place where aircraft and coordinated surface ships found them most easily.